Hey guys. So I know I didn't schedule a live video, but I figured I would hop on while I'm here. I'm throwing some pasta bowls, like dinner bowls that I make. I'm gonna go through kind of the process of making the bowl and also talk you guys through how I make my pieces consistent in like their size, the width, the rim, the shape, which I think is one of the more difficult things when you're trying to make a set or you're trying to get better, have your pieces look a little more refined. You want your body of work to look a little nicer. I think it's nice when everything is kind of consistent. Not to say that some of the funky, inconsistent pots aren't really great, but these I think give you something that you can make and make some money off of by selling a lot or taking commissions for these. So first of all, weigh out your clay. All your pieces of clay need to be the same weight. First of all, if you're going to make something, like make all your bowls look exactly the same, the balls of clay need to be the same weight. That's a no-brainer. So I've weighed out all my balls and kind of wedged them a little bit. And I also have, I don't know if you guys can see, I have a little mirror right here that I got from the dollar store. And when I was first trying to get my pieces all consistent, I was watching Simon Leach, and so he throws with a mirror. I was like, all right, if Simon Leach does it, it's got to work, right? So that helps me a lot, actually, to get my pieces really consistent. And even if you're not trying to get your pieces really consistent, a mirror helps you. If you're already kind of intermediate, I don't suggest mirrors for beginners because it kind of cripples them because they rely on it too much. But if you're kind of intermediate and you're feeling like you need, an extra step, the mirror is really, really cool for that because you can kind of look at it and see what exactly is happening to the clay as you're pulling it up, instead of having to kind of crane your neck over or forgetting to do that, and then you're like, oh, it looks good from the top, why doesn't it look good straight on? Sherry, so I just use a little piece of clay and I just like smush my mirror right into it, and it stays right there. Some people have like freestanding or they have big mirrors like right in front of their wheel so they can see their whole situation. Since this is not my personal studio, I can't put up a giant mirror. I think that would be preferable, but this little guy works just fine, and it was only $1 from the dollar store. So basically all your balls of clay need to be exactly the same weight. You kind of need to know what you're doing too. So if you are wanting to make multiples of these bowls, so I kind of go through and I think, what is the general size that I want these bowls to be and how much clay do I think I'm gonna need. So these are about 7.5 inches wide, and they are, I want to say, about 2.25 inches tall. So I knew that I would need about 2 pounds to make these. So I've got 2-pound balls ready to go. So what I'm gonna do is center this clay. It's a little bit stiff today, and everyone centers a little bit differently. I use this part of my hand, like the heel of my hand, I guess. I always think about in those like self-defense classes, if you're gonna uppercut somebody in the nose, that's the most powerful part of your hand and your wrist because you've got this action going. So I use that part and I press on the side here, and then I use a hand on top to give like that top pressure. And so I'm gonna kind of cone it up a little bit and down. And I'm gonna make, when I'm teaching like beginning classes, I always call this like the hockey puck. So I'm gonna make my hockey puck as wide as the foot of the bowl that I want. And I'm gonna remember for each one that I make exactly how wide this is. You can measure it to start while you're getting used to it. Now I kind of know in general about how wide this needs to be for what I'm making, but for anything that you make, the first few times, especially if you're wanting it to be really consistent, you should measure everything that you do, write it down, remember it, so that you can repeat that and do it again and again until you get the size and the shape that you want, and you're able to like continue making that instead of sitting down at the wheel and you're like, I don't know why these don't look like my other ones. You really have to pay attention to that. So this is, I think, like a little bit less than 5 inches wide, my little hockey puck here. So I'm gonna go ahead and open, and I always open with 2 fingers in the center and press straight down. Some people do thumbs. There are multiple ways to open. Don't worry about it unless you're looking for a new way. Stick with the way that works for you. All right, so I'm gonna kind of support with this outside hand. It's not really doing anything, but then I'm gonna go back in now that I've got my opening, and I'm gonna pull toward my belly button to open this up. And then I'm gonna go in and kind of compress the bottom here. So, all right. So, I don't know who everyone is watching on YouTube now, you know, as far as like pottery people, but I would always recommend Simon Leach, because, and his videos are very long, they're a little rambly, I'm not gonna lie, but he has a really, really good method for making pieces consistently and making enough work, like if you were gonna sell it. If you were just worried about, like, you know, if you're a hobbyist, or, you know, you want your pieces to each have their own unique like character, you don't want them to all look the same, he still has some really great tips on there for throwing. Some of them are hidden in those really long videos, but they're usually worth it. So now that I've got this open, I'm just kind of compressing and making sure it's open as much as I need it to be. So you can kind of see, I think you can see on there, this bulge that I have from opening. If I try to go in and get my fingers in there and do a pull at this point, this thing is gonna throw my hands off. It's gonna make my pull really inconsistent because it's really funky right there. So I always, no matter what I'm really throwing, get rid of this lump thing before I actually do a pull on anything. So I'm gonna use this part of my hand again, and I'm gonna kind of press this against the outside here. I'm not really putting like a ton of pressure, I'm just laying it there for now. And then I'm gonna use 2 fingers on the inside here, and I'm just gonna press together a little bit and kind of just give that a little bit of a push, and you're kind of already starting your pulls there by evening that wall out, and that's gonna make it so much nicer when you go in there to actually do a pull. You're not gonna be fighting with that big bulge of clay. So for these bowls, which for you guys that are just coming in, so I'm gonna make more of these dinner, like pasta type bowls. And so I figured this is a good one to do, to show you guys how to make things consistent, because these especially need to be very consistent because they kind of sit inside of each other. And they just look really nice. You know, if somebody's gonna buy a set and have it in their cabinet, it just looks really nice when they're all kind of the same size, and they look really pretty together, stacked. So now that I got it open, I kind of did my fake first pull there where I kind of smushed it. So now I'm gonna get in here, I'm gonna kind of define, I don't know if you can see that, I'm gonna kind of define this area here. I'm pushing out just a little bit, so I have something to kind of grab onto. And then I always go in and I use like my middle finger down here at the bottom, and I kind of create a ledge that I'm actually gonna grab onto. So I'm gonna go in, grab on that bottom ledge, and for the first 2 pulls, I'm just kind of getting the clay up. I'm not really shaping yet, but I don't want to get too much height now, because if I pull all this clay straight up and then I try to pull it out, it's going to be super thin, it's just going to fall apart. So let's see. I can't see the comments very well from here, you guys, so I'll try to catch them if you have any. Alright, so I'm going to go in again. This time I'm going to be pulling straight up, but I'm going to press a little bit harder with my inside finger, because I'm going to kind of start that inner bowl shape. Okay, so compress the rim on the top every pull that I do. All right, so now I'm gonna really go in and get a little more shape going. So when I pull, I use these two fingers inside and outside. So instead of coming straight up, I'm gonna kind of follow the shape of what I'm actually making. So instead of going straight up, I'm gonna pull kind of like that and kind of give it that curve, because that's what we want it to look like. So you're almost kind of tracing the shape. So I'm gonna make my little ledge, grab some clay, and I'm gonna push harder with my inside finger because I'm trying to kind of push that clay out a little bit, give it like a bowl shape. Check on that. And so at this point, I don't do this anymore because I find it to be a little bit annoying. But I always put like a rounded foot on these bowls, and I have a foot tool like that for the bottom foot. You could put that in now, and if you wanted to use your foot tool, you have to put it in now before you widen this out, or when you widen it out and you go in with that tool, it's just going to push it all back. So I'll probably just trim a foot in this. I don't trim a lot, so might as well have one thing to practice on, right? All right, so again, I'm gonna grab that kind of ledge down there at the bottom and pinch, and I'm pushing a little harder with my inside finger, and I'm pulling this out. All the while, like, I am looking at myself in my little mirror, looking at my pot and my fingers, like how everything is shaping out. Because the mirror is gonna help you see. I find that it's most helpful when you're actually shaping something. So I can really see exactly what's happening on the side without craning my neck, or without thinking, oh, my pot looks great here from up top, and then I pull it off the wheel and I look on the side and it looks really weird and it doesn't look like the other bowls. So I'm gonna get in there again, and right now I'm pushing out. Whew. Might have pushed a little too hard there. So ultimately, I want this bowl to be about 7.5 inches at the rim. So I use a ruler. Calipers don't agree with me. I have a really hard time with them. I set the length and then I hit them, or they fall to the ground, or something happens and it's messed up and then I have to redo it. So like a ruler is always, 7.5 is always there. I know exactly where it is. I can just do that so much easier for me. All right. So now I'm about 7.5 inches. So what I'm gonna do is kind of look in my mirror now, and I'm gonna make sure that the shape is actually pretty consistent with my other bowls. And I just use my fingers to shape. Just like with the calipers, ribs, when I'm shaping a bowl, don't agree with me either. So I don't use ribs to shape bowls unless they're really big bowls and I really need the help. But for these, I don't do that. If a rib works for you, you can definitely use a rib on the inside to give it that shape and kind of use your fingers on the outside. And you can use your mirror to really see exactly what's happening when you do use that rib, and you just get more of a feel that way when you have a little more experience really seeing what's happening. So this one's looking pretty good. I'm just gonna clean it up. And then what I do with these bowls is leave the rim raw. So what I'll do is I'll use like a wet sponge on the rim before I glaze it after it's bisqued. I'll use a wet sponge on the rim, and then I'll dip it in the glaze, pull it out, and then I'll sponge the glaze just off the very top of the rim to leave that raw, because this clay is a nice red terracotta, so it looks really, really pretty when it's left raw. So since I'm gonna do that, and this is another one of those consistency things, if you do something on one piece, you have to do that on every piece so that they all look the same. if that's what you're wanting, if you're wanting a set, if you're wanting consistency. So I'm just gonna use a piece of a plastic bag that I ripped off there because I lose my chamois, and smooth that out, and then we've got a nice dinner pasta bowl. Looks pretty good. The other thing that I do a lot in my work is I leave these throwing lines in there because I personally like them. I think they give your piece like a feel. You can kind of see the process that happened to actually make it. Gives it some personality, I think, to leave them in there. Some people like to smooth all their throwing lines out. Nothing wrong with that. I do that on certain pieces, but these especially, anything with the red clay, I really like leaving those process marks in there. So I think I'll throw another one and walk through the process again in case anyone missed some of that stuff that I just did, if you're just coming in. Another tip, when I make bowls, especially with my clay body, normally I could throw that bowl on one of these, but I don't, because these are a little bendy when you pick them up, and my rims warp every time. It was driving me crazy. These are so much easier for me to use because I have so many, and they sit right next to each other, but they're not working for these wider bowls. I'm getting a lot of warping rims. So I'm gonna do another pasta bowl here. So basically, I see like a couple new people came in. So I'm making these pasta bowls here. I make them all very consistent. A lot of my work is pretty consistently, you know, things look like they're all the same size. They look pretty uniform, and I do that a couple of different ways. So you can see that I have a ball of clay here. It's 2 pounds for this bowl, and I've weighed out all of these balls beforehand. They're all the exact same weight, because if you're gonna make multiples of something, that's the first step. You have to have really consistent weight on all of your balls of clay, and you have to do it that way every single time. So I always write down when I'm first kind of figuring out what I want to make and how I'm going to make it. I write down the exact amount of clay that I'm going to use, and then I kind of measure everything. So I'll explain that here in a second. So this clay is pretty stiff. Just get this centered. So you can see, like, I have a mirror here. It's just a little dollar store mirror that I hooked on the wheel tray with some clay. So I'm gonna center this, and for these bowls, every single time I make one of these bowls, I'm gonna make this, I kind of call it like the hockey puck when I'm teaching like new students. So this hockey puck, this lump of clay here, is gonna be as wide as the foot of my bowl. It's gonna be as wide as I want the foot of my bowl to be, because this is gonna be kind of our base, and we're gonna open from there. So every time I make these bowls, I make this about 5 inches, a little bit less maybe, tiny bit. And that's gonna help me make all of them equally consistent, because, you know, if you're at a certain level of throwing ability and you have 2 pounds of clay and you measure it out to be the exact same height and weight every single time, your ability to pull that clay up is kind of the same every time. So you're always going to make it the same size, if that makes sense. So I've got my 5-inch wide hockey puck here that I've centered. I've got my mirror so I can kind of pay attention to exactly what I'm doing. I don't have to crane my neck. I can see the shaping that's happening. So I'm going to go in and open this up. So let's just push down, and I leave like a little more than a 1/4 inch, like between that and a 1/2 inch of clay at the bottom. And then I'm going to open it up here. So, and then I'm only opening it to about that same width, that 5 inches, because if I open any farther, it's just gonna flop down on the bat. So, now that I've got it opened, this is my other tip, not necessarily for throwing consistently, but for throwing at all. When you open, if you end up with this belly situation, this big lump, when you go to pull that up, it's going to be a nightmare. It's really hard to kind of grab and keep consistent to really push that giant lump in. So what I do to kind of cheat that a little bit is I use like this part of my hand, the heel of my hand, and I rest it there on the outside, and then I use 2 fingers inside, and I just push a little bit between both, and you bring that clay up a little and kind of get rid of that weird bump, and that's going to help you a lot when you do your first pull. So this is kind of where the mirror comes in handy for me. I don't have to crane my neck, but I also can see exactly what's happening. And that way, every piece that I make is going to be kind of the same shape. That way I'm not just making a bowl that's 7.5 inches wide, 2 1/4 inches tall, and they're all like a different shape of bowl. But this way I can kind of see exactly the shape that's happening. So I'm going to use my finger and kind of create myself like a little ledge to grab onto down here. I'm just pushing in a little bit so that I can really just grab onto that clay there. And then I'm going to do my first pull just basically straight up. I'm just still kind of evening that wall out a little bit. I don't want too much height because then when I go to open it up, the clay is going to be too thin. Alright, so now when I do my pull up, the way I shape my bowls and just about everything that I make is with my fingers only. I don't use ribs because they just don't agree with me. I find that they're really difficult for me personally to use. If a rib works for you, I say go for it. But what I do is instead of coming straight up with a pull, like if you're down here pulling up straight, you're gonna get a straight walled piece, right? So with a bowl, I just kind of trace that shape that I want, and that's what happens, instead of using a rib to shape the bowl. Alright, so I'm gonna go in and I'm pushing a little bit harder with my inside finger because I'm starting to kind of push out and shape this while also bringing the clay up. And I'm checking myself in the mirror to make sure everything looks right. I'm gonna go in again, pinch and pull out. And what I'm aiming for is 7.5 inches wide. And alright, so I'm going in again. I'm going to grab down there and I'm still just, I'm pulling some clay up and shaping it kind of at the same time. You know, get it all done in one pull is nice. Okay, so I can tell right now it's not exactly where I want it to be, but I'm going to measure it. So I want it to be 7.5 inches wide, and I use a ruler because calipers are not my friend, and a ruler is just easier for me. So it's 7 inches wide right now, so I need another 1/2 inch, and it's still pretty thick down here, so I know that I have clay to pull up. So I'm gonna grab down here at the bottom, and I'm just gonna grab and pinch a little bit. I know there's not a lot of clay down there now, so I'm really just kind of evening it out, and I'm gonna give it some shape. I'm gonna go back down one more time and give it a little more of the shape that I want. So the more you make one thing, you know, if you make a bunch of the same thing, this is gonna be so easy, you know, once you get to that point. But building up to it is the hard part. So, you know, you really have to measure when you're first coming up with a design that you wanna make. You have to measure everything like at each step, at your centered step, you know, how wide is your foot gonna be? How wide is your opened pot before you pull your walls up? How wide is it now? How tall is it now? To make sure that you're getting the clay pulled up and shaped out the way that it's supposed to be. Alright, so I can tell in my mirror that it's not exactly the shape that I want, so I need to push it out a little bit more at the bottom to give it like a nice fat belly kind of a shape. So I'm gonna get in there. I'm not really pulling it now. I'm just supporting the outside and I'm pushing out a little bit on the inside. Okay. I think it's a little closer now. All right, so I'm gonna measure it and just be sure that I'm 7.5. Yep. Okay. Let's clean this up. So I'm also going to leave the rim of these raw when I glaze them. So I want to make sure the rim is like extra smooth and nice. So I just use a piece of plastic bag that I ripped off of a Walmart bag. And I just give it a little bit of pressure there. Okay. All right, I think it looks pretty good. So again, the basics of throwing consistently are going to be, you know, weighing out your clay. It's going to be the same every time, no matter what. Otherwise, it's not going to look the way that you want it to look. Measure everything. Use a mirror to get like the shape consistency. So this one is done, and ooh, let's see if I can get it off there. Okay. So in comparison to like this other one that I made, you can see they're very consistent. Shape-wise, not so much, because this is the one I just did. I couldn't get it exactly the shape that I wanted it to be, but you know, they still look like they're together and they're in the same family, they're the same bowl, they could stack together and it would be really nice. All right, guys, I am signing off. Hopefully this helped you out, gave you some good insight into how to make things consistent and make sets, or just in general helped a little bit. Let me know, and I'll try to maybe post this in the group so that it doesn't disappear after this, and then you can kind of let me know if there's anything else you guys want to see. I'm back in the studio a little bit now, and the quarantine has made me very bored and restless, so I would love to throw more things and show you guys.